Chapter 32. So what you might think, continued George, what's a cloud of dust got to do with anything? Why do we care or need to know what happened billions of years ago in outer space? Does it matter? Well, yes, it does. Because that cloud of dust is the reason we are here today. Now, we know that stars are formed from giant clouds of gas in outer space. Some of these stars end their lives by becoming black holes that slowly, very slowly, let things escape until they vanish in a huge explosion. Other stars explode before they become black holes and send all the matter inside them through space. We know that all the elements we are made of were created inside the bellies of these stars that exploded a long time ago. All the people on Earth, the animals, the planets, the rocks, the air, and the oceans are made of elements forged inside stars. Whatever we might think we are the children of the stars. It took billions and billions of years for nature to make us out of these elements. George paused for a second. So you see, it took an incredibly long time to make us and our planet isn't like any other planet in the solar system. There are bigger ones, more impressive ones, but they aren't places you could think of as home. Like Venus, for example, which is really hot, or Mercury, where one day lasts for 59 of our Earth days. Imagine that. If one day at school lasted 59 days, that would be pretty awful. George paused for a moment and then continued to speak, the whole hall hanging on his every word as he described some of the wonders of the universe. Finally, he came to what he thought was probably the most important part at the end of his presentation. Our planet is amazing, and it's ours, he said. We belong to it. We are made of all the same stuff as the planet itself. We really do need to look after it, and my dad's been saying this for years, but I've felt embarrassed by him. All I could see was how different he was from other parents, but I don't feel that way now. He's right to say we have to stop messing up Earth, and he's right that we can all just try a little harder. I feel proud of him now for wanting to protect something as unique and beautiful as Earth, but we need to all do it or it won't work, and our awesome planet will be ruined. Of course, we can also work on trying to find other planets for us to live on, but it isn't going to be easy. We know there isn't one close to us, so if there's another Earth out there, and there might be, it's a long, long way away. It's exciting trying to discover new planets and worlds out there in the universe, but that doesn't mean that home isn't the place you still want to come back to. We've got to make sure that in 100 years' time, we've still got an Earth to come back to. So you might be wondering how I know all this. Well, the other thing I wanted to say to you is that you don't need to find an actual secret key like I did to unlock the universe. There's one that everyone can use if they learn how. It's called physics. That's what you need to understand the universe. Thank you. The hall burst into applause as everyone rose to their feet, giving George a standing ovation. Wiping a tear from his eye, the principal sprang into the stage and clapped George on the back. Well done, George, well done. He pumped George's arm up and down in a very vigorous handshake. George blushed, and he was embarrassed by the clapping and kind of wished it would stop. Down in the audience, Dr. Reaper also appeared to be crying, but not from pride or happiness like the principal. He was weeping for quite a different reason. Oh, Cosmos, he raged. So close, I had you in my hands, and he's stolen it away from me. The principal helped George down off the platform and had a very brief consultation with his fellow judges, all except Dr. Reaper, that is, who was hunched in a seat whispering to himself and casting nasty looks at George. Borrowing the gym teacher's whistle and blowing it sharply several times, the principal thought the hall to order again. Ahem, he said, I would like to announce this year's winner of the inter-school science presentation by almost a unanimous vote on the part of the judges is George Greenby. The school hall cheered. George, the principal said, has given a wonderful presentation, and I am delighted to award him first prize, which is this truly amazing computer kindly donated by our sponsors. One of the other judges produced a large cardboard box from under the table and handed it to George. Thank you, sir, said George, who was rather overwhelmed by both the experience and by the size of the box he had just been given. He staggered down the aisle toward the exit, clasping his prize in both hands. Everyone smiled as he passed, except for one group of boys sitting at the end of the row who were deliberately not clapping. They sat there with their arms folded, glaring at George. You haven't heard the last of this, hissed Ringo as George passed. George ignored him and hurried on until he reached Eric, Annie, and Susan. You did it, George. I'm so proud, said Eric, trying to hug George around the cardboard box. George, you were great, said Annie shyly. I never thought you would be so good on stage. And your science was pretty amazing, too. Did I get it right, said George. When I said billions, I should have said tens of millions. And when I said Jupiter, I thought maybe I should have... No, said Annie. You'd got everything right, didn't he, Dad? George nodded and smiled at Eric smiled and beamed at George, especially the last part. You got that really, really right, and you won first prize. You must be happy. I am, said George, but there's just one problem. What are my parents going to say when I come home with a computer? They're going to be so angry. Or so proud, said a voice. George looked around and saw his dad. His jaw dropped. Were you here? Did you hear my speech? I did, said his dad. Your mother wanted me to come and pick you up from school. She was worried about you this morning, and I got here in time to hear you talk. I'm glad I did, George, because you're right. We shouldn't be scared of science. We should use it to help us save the planet, not close our minds to it. Does that mean I can keep my computer? George's dad smiled. Well, I think you deserve it. Only an hour a week, though, or my homemade generator won't be able to keep up. There was a sudden commotion behind them, and their little group was pushed to one side by Dr. Reaper, who was charging through the crowd in a hurry. Followed by were Ringo and the other members of the gang, and they all looked mad. George watched him and turned to Eric. Aren't you going to do something about Reaper, like punish him? No, said Eric sadly. I think Graham's punished himself quite enough already. Best to leave him be. I don't doubt our paths will cross again. But, said George. Eric, I wanted to ask you, how did Reaper know where to find you? I mean, you could have gone anywhere in the world, but he was waiting for you here, and he was right. How did he know? Ah, well, the house next door to you, said Eric. It belonged to my old tutor, the man in the photo with the beard. But he disappeared. Well, he only sort of disappeared, said Eric. I got a letter from him a while ago saying he was going away on a long journey, and he didn't know if he'd ever be back. He told me he wanted to have his house in case I ever needed somewhere to work on Cosmos. He couldn't have imagined that Graham would lie and wait for me here all these years. Where did the old man go? He went, Eric started. Home, said Susan firmly. Can I give you a lift? He asked, said George's dad. Oh, no, he said. I've got my bike. I'm sure we can balance the computer on the handlebars. Dad, said George, please, we might drop it. I don't mind running George home, said Susan. It might be cramped, but it's amazing what you can fit inside a minivan. Back at George's house that night, Eric, Susan, and Annie all stayed for a delicious supper of homegrown vegetables eaten by candlelight at the kitchen table. Eric and George's dad got into a long, enjoyable argument about whether it was more important to look for a new planet or try and save this one, while Susan helped George set up his shiny new computer. Annie went out in the garden and fed Freddie, who was looking rather lonely in his sty. When she came back from chatting to the pig, she spent the evening dancing around George's mom, showing her all of the ballet steps and telling her lots of tall stories which George's mom thought was make-believe. After they went home, leaving with lots of promises of eco-warriors, talking to scientists at their conferences, and trips to the Nutcracker together, George went upstairs to his room. He was very tired. He got into his pajamas, but he didn't close the curtains. He wanted to look out of the window as he lay under his comforter. It was a clear evening, and the night sky was studded with brilliant twinkling stars. As he watched, a shooting star fell across the dark background, its long, shiny tail blazing with light for a few seconds before it melted into nothing. Perhaps the shooting star is a piece of the comet's tail, thought George as he fell asleep. As a comet passes the sun, it warms, and the ice on it starts to melt. And that, my friends, is the end of George's secret key to the universe.